In the evening, a ball was held at the castle. Musicians played nonstop, servants carried dishes, guests raised their cups and laughed. The queen was expected in the ballroom, but she was not there. The lady-in-waiting had also disappeared. At first, no one noticed her absence because the courtiers were watching the dances of the heir and guests from a neighboring state. Then the court administrator realized that the servants had brought the late procession to the throne room without the queen. He sent 2 guards to the chambers, 2 more to the garden gallery, and the rest to the temple, where they usually secluded themselves and prayed before important nights. In the sacristy, they found the queen and her lady-in-waiting on the stone floor. They were sitting close to each other, both in tears, with crumpled dresses, loose hair, and unraveled ribbons. The queen's gloves and the lady-in-waiting's belt were lying on the table. The bishop, who was called first, ordered everyone to leave except for the 2 senior guards. He took the lamp from them, approached the women, and asked them to stand up. They did not argue. He ordered them to kiss the cross in turn, said a short prayer, and told them that confession was necessary for the salvation of their souls. He did not shout. He spoke calmly, and both listened. Half an hour later, he led them in different directions. The lady-in-waiting down the servants' corridor, the queen through the side vestibule to the royal gallery. No one returned to the ball. The steward announced that Her Majesty was unwell, and the orchestra switched to more tranquil pieces. The next morning, a carriage was waiting for the lady-in-waiting at the castle gate. A small chest was loaded onto the roof, and a traveling shawl and a box of letters tied with string were placed in the carriage. The bishop arrived himself, told the steward that this was required by canon law, and left ahead of time to meet the lady-in-waiting at the diocesan house. The queen remained in her chambers, where thick curtains had been hung and the mirrors removed. The doctors brought jars of tinctures and bowls of hot water. The servants whispered at the door and did not argue among themselves, because everyone understood that what had happened in the sacristy would be discussed and condemned. No one heard a single cry. The queen did not call out, did not send notes, did not demand anyone except her chambermaid and doctor. The doctor noted that the queen was experiencing a decline in strength and ordered that visits be restricted. The bishop sent a note to the chancellery. The lady-in-waiting must leave the capital and live under the supervision of the abbess of a convent on a distant estate. There was not a single harsh word in the note. It said that it was safer for everyone that way. Queen Helena was born in another country and came to this court as a girl. She was married to the king by agreement when they were both about 20. The king was even-tempered, neither cruel nor kind, cautious and stingy with affection. He spent a lot of time with his advisors, went hunting, and received ambassadors. Elena ran the household, received the wives of ambassadors, and taught young ladies-in-waiting protocol. She did not like noisy feasts, although she knew how to sit up straight, smile, and raise a cup at the right moment. No scandal involving her name had ever arisen before. Elena had no close friends except for one girl who had been brought to her from her hometown as a lady-in-waiting. The girl's name was Agnieszka. She knew the queen's native language, remembered the smells of their former home, and knew how to sew corsets so that no traces of the bones remained. At first, she was just a convenient assistant. Then she became a habit, a necessity. They would get up at dawn together, when the court was still asleep, sit in a small room by the window, and sort through letters. Agnieszka brought a cup of broth, checked the hooks on the dresses, and found lost pins. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, but she knew how to pause when the queen lingered on a piece of paper, longer than usual. Gradually, the queen got used to the fact that every difficult day ended in the same room. Quiet cleaning, a removed corset, a warm brick at her feet, dry bread with cheese, a report on the household. She felt that there was a person nearby who asked for neither rewards, nor patrons, nor court games. Agnieszka did not promote her brothers or ask for positions for her uncles. She only asked if everything was ready for tomorrow's audience and was not afraid to remain silent nearby. In court life, this is a rare skill. After a few years, the habit became an addiction. The queen began to wait for every step of the lady-in-waiting in the corridor. If there were no steps, her heart beat faster. If she heard running on the stairs, she straightened up and pretended to read. That evening, when a ball was held to cement peace with the neighbors, everything went according to plan. The king delivered a pre-agreed speech, and the heir raised a cup. The queen listened to the ambassador's compliments and stepped aside, as was proper, to make room for dancing. Agnieszka was supposed to take a bag of letters from the embassy wives to the queen's room. At the door to the corridor, they were stopped by a schoolboy joke played by the pages. Someone pulled a ribbon out of a lady-in-waiting's sleeve. The ribbon fell, and one of the girls stepped on it with her heel, laughing. Agnieszka bent down to pick it up and realized that she was about to cry, right there in the corridor. The queen saw this movement and gestured to the chambermaid to stay. They walked past without stopping, but both knew it was better to leave the hall. They walked through narrow passages and found themselves at the door to the temple gallery, where it was always cooler and quieter. The queen knew that the sacristy could be locked from the inside. She opened the small door with a key and went in. Agnieszka followed her in and closed the bolt. On the table lay catalogues of fabrics for vestments and lamps hung on the wall. They sat down on the floor. The queen took her lady-in-waiting by the hand. Agnieszka buried her forehead in her shoulder. The tears began to flow. They did not agree on anything, did not swear, and did not argue. They just sat for a while, huddled together, holding hands, until the noise of the ball faded in the distance. When the guard with the lamp appeared at the door, they did not have time to change anything. The bishop came quickly. He knew that in such matters every extra witness was an extra mouth. He did not ask questions about the details. He said that sin must be confessed and renounced, and he understood that the queen was not a parishioner from the market, and he acted cautiously. He ordered the lady-in-waiting to name the place where she was ready to spend her penance, and ordered the chambermaid to gather warm clothes for her. He assured the queen that everything would be kept within the bounds of propriety, and that it was important for her to maintain her dignity. He understood that the king's authority did not like high-profile cases that spoiled negotiations. On the third day after the ball, the king summoned the bishop. They spoke without witnesses. The king asked what exactly had happened. The bishop replied that he had seen two women embracing and crying. The king did not ask any further questions. He asked what needed to be done to avoid rumors. The bishop replied that it had already been done. The lady-in-waiting would go to a convent under the supervision of the abbess. The queen would hold a service for the preservation of peace in the family and temporarily give up receptions. Everything else would be kept secret. The king nodded. He showed neither jealousy nor rudeness. He remained a man of agreement and balance. The lady-in-waiting was taken to a distant estate where the widows of knights once lived. There had been no sewing workshop there for a long time, only low rooms, a garden, storerooms, and a small house chapel. The abbess received her calmly. She said that she would make sure that everything was quiet and that it was not worth writing letters. She explained how the house was run: prayers on a schedule, work in the garden, the apothecary, the kitchen. Agnieszka took up a task she had known since childhood: fabrics, threads, mending clothes, repairing linen. She was given assignments for the local women. She sorted scraps of fabric and wrote notes on canvas bags. In the evenings, she sat in the chapel because it was easier for her to breathe there. She knew that the queen was in the capital, behind closed doors, in a room with thick walls. She counted the days. The queen locked herself in her chambers. She refused to follow her previous schedule. She hardly ate. The doctor brought her tinctures. The chambermaid aired the rooms, changed the sheets, and brought water. The queen did not complain of pain, but she did not want to get up. When she was persuaded to go out, at least to the garden gallery, she quietly refused. Soon the court got used to it. The queen was not present at dinners. The queen did not receive visitors. The queen was ill. The advisers took it upon themselves to receive ambassadors. The king sat at the head of the table without a partner on his left. The heir took the seat next to him. But this satisfied few. The city discussed whether the queen had the evil eye, or whether she was being punished by a higher power, or whether she was suffering from an unknown fever. The Chamber of Physicians recorded a new method of treatment: baths, tinctures, ointments. Nothing helped, because the illness was not in the body. The first letters from the distant home were short and came infrequently. The abbess did not encourage correspondence, but she did not categorically forbid it if the letter was without names and without affection. They wrote through weavers who took cloth to the market, through an old clerk who had his own interests in the capital, through a laundress whose daughter served in the queen's kitchen. The letters were simple: who worked how much, who was sick, how everyone was coping with fasting. The queen pieced together a picture from these bits and pieces. She kept the letters at her bedside and did not part with them even during visits to the doctor. Once the laundress was caught in the kitchen with someone else's letter in her skirt. She was beaten with rods, and the network was interrupted for a month. When the next letter arrived, it was sealed with an anonymous seal, and the addresses were marked only with dots and dashes, the meaning of which only two women knew. The bishop was not the queen's enemy. He believed he was doing what he had to do. He visited her every month and told her that God forgives and that time heals. He reminded her of her duties to the state and to her husband. The queen listened and did not argue. She did not ask for her exile to be softened. She did not ask for her lady-in-waiting to be returned. She only asked to be left alone. The bishop would get up, bless her, and leave, leaving a cross on a chain on the table. The chambermaid would then collect these crosses and put them in a box, because the queen did not wear jewelry. The king tried to act on his own. He suggested that the queen visit her hometown to meet with her mother. She refused. He told the doctor to increase her care. He replaced the chambermaid with a gentler and more patient one. He asked the bishop if it was time to return the queen to her public duties. The bishop replied that it was necessary to wait a little longer. The king waited. He loved order. Scandals were not in his interest. He calculated that in a year's time, what had happened would be forgotten. He endured the wait for an heir. He tried not to talk about bed and children. It was important to him that the peace he had signed at the ball would not be destroyed by rumors. Agnieszka did not consider herself a nun in the distant house. She did not take vows. She simply lived by the rules. She got up early, did exercises as she had been taught as a child, kept a small account of expenses, and helped in the kitchen. She was not allowed to leave the estate without the permission of the abbess, and she obeyed this rule. Sometimes she thought she saw an old cart with a chambermaid's sign attached to the side through the window. But these were rare occurrences, and not always real. She kept a bundle with 2 ribbons and a metal thimble next to her bed. The thimble was a gift from the queen on her last birthday. At that time, there was no trouble yet, and the queen herself chose this thimble in the master's shop without sending any of her servants. Agnieszka remembered how she put it on her finger and felt that for the first time in a long time, she truly owned something. Once, an official from the capital arrived at the distant house. He brought an order. The lady-in-waiting must move even further away to a house by the old church at the very edge of the kingdom, where widowed boyars and unmarried relatives were once kept. The abbess did not argue. She saw that the order had been issued and that its signatures could not be revoked. On the way, Agnieszka coughed and asked to stop several times. This house had no well-kept chests of drawers or clean rooms. It smelled of medicine and iron. The household was run by an old steward and his wife, a respectable but rude woman. They immediately made it clear that she was not allowed to write letters. Agnieszka stopped waiting. She began to record her observations in a small notebook that she kept under her pillow. She wrote down how many stitches she made each day, how many times she bandaged other people's cuts, how many pieces of bread she gave to the workers. At the end of each day, she opened the notebook and put a tiny dot at the bottom. She knew what it meant. Meanwhile, the queen was losing weight. The doctor selected her food. Her clothes were becoming loose. The ladies-in-waiting stopped asking her for advice on the order of appearances. The heir grew older and sat more often next to his father at council meetings. 7 months after the ball, the queen attended a short service in the chapel for the first time. She stood at the back, near the wall. No one approached her. The bishop only nodded. After the service, the queen returned to her room and asked for a smaller one. They made her a bedroom in the former nursery. There was a simple bed, a single table, and a small stove. She opened and closed the stove door herself to warm her hands. She stopped looking in mirrors. The maid brought bundles of linen. The queen sorted them so that her hands would not remain empty. In the evening, she wove letters and scraps of thread. She cut off a strand of hair herself when the maid did her hair too tightly. She hid this strand in a small box that she had been given on her wedding day. There were several buttons, a fragment of a mother-of-pearl comb, a button from a child's dress, and now the strand of hair. During one of his visits, the bishop said, that the lady-in-waiting had been transferred even further away, to a house near the old church. He said it was necessary because there were too many curious people in the first convent. He said it was safer that way. The Queen listened, and her face remained unchanged. She only asked for a smaller chamber and more water. The chambermaid put hot water bottles under her. The guards at the door were replaced. It became quiet inside. By spring, the Queen had almost stopped going out. She received the doctor and 2 trusted women. One of them was the very laundress who had been punished in the winter. She was brought back to service because she knew how to work silently. She no longer took letters. She only ironed the laundry and left silently. The Queen kept everything inside. Sometimes she opened the box, carefully rearranged a strand of hair, stroking it with her fingers. Once, she had a toothache and had to call a surgeon. The surgeon performed the procedure quickly. The tooth was weak and did not hold well. It was removed with forceps, and the Queen was given a piece of cloth. That night, the Queen sat alone at the table for a long time. In the morning, the chambermaid saw that the box had become heavier. The Queen no longer opened it in front of the servants. Agnieszka lived by the clock in the distant house. Sometimes peasants from the surrounding area came to them, bringing things to be repaired and telling them the news. They talked about taxes, about recruits, about how holidays were becoming less frequent in the capital. One old man said that the Queen did not go out to the people. She nodded silently. She made no attempt to escape. She learned to rub ointments, boil simple decoctions, and mend heavy brocade. Sometimes she was allowed to go into the temple and clean the choir loft. She did this carefully because she loved order. She dreamed that she was back in the Queen's small room, where the letters lay, where the fogged-up cup stood, where small decorations were laid out on the table. She woke up in a dark room and went to light the lamp wick. She did not cry. She wrote a dot in her notebook and lay down. The king had aged over the year. At council meetings, he listened more often to the bishop's opinion. The heir had learned to remain silent during arguments and to look at his papers. The city had stopped waiting for the Queen to appear at celebrations. The weavers no longer brought her new patterns for her dresses. The kitchen economized. The house manager made sure that no unnecessary people entered the corridor leading to the Queen's chambers. The servants learned to avoid the doors where the chambermaid might appear with a basin. Life shifted by half a tone. A year later, when the date of the ball had passed, the king ordered a service for the health of the family and the peace. The bishop served calmly. After the service, he went up to the Queen. He saw a woman who had become almost transparent. He realized that talk of a return to court life was meaningless. He sat down nearby, placed a cross on the table, and said the standard words about mercy. The Queen thanked him with her eyes. She looked tired and calm. The bishop got up and left. He realized that all that remained was to wait. The Queen died early the next month, in the morning. The chambermaid entered the room and saw that the Queen was lying on her back, her hands folded on her chest, her face clean. There was a box on the table. The key was nearby. The chambermaid did not open it. She called the doctor. The doctor came, examined her, and nodded. The king was called later. He entered the room, stood at the head of the bed, and quietly asked for the body to be covered with a blanket. He did not walk around the room or touch anything. He left and ordered the bishop to be summoned. The
bishop arrived quickly. He asked everyone to leave except the chambermaid. He went to the table and opened the box. Inside was a lock of hair, tightly bound with a thin thread. Next to it was a tooth, tied in a linen cloth so that it would not roll away. A narrow strip of paper was glued to the inside of the lid. On it was written in the Queen's handwriting, "My only confession." The bishop looked at these things, closed the box, put the key next to it, and asked the chambermaid not to let anyone in until he returned the box to the king. He understood the meaning without words. He understood that the Queen had kept what she could call the truth. She had kept a material memory of the one she loved and a sign of her own pain. He said nothing more. He took the box out and gave it to the king. The king, having received the box, did not open it in front of others. He went to the small library. There he sat down at the table and opened the lid.
He saw the hair. He saw the tooth wrapped in cloth. He read the inscription. He sat for a while and thought. He understood that these were not items for trial. He understood that this was not a political document. He understood that these were the remnants of a life he did not control. He closed the lid, called his secretary, and said that the funeral would be quiet, without pompous processions. The secretary took note. The funeral took place without crowds. The city was silent. Women in the markets said that the Queen was strict but fair. Men at the gates discussed how she rarely smiled and did not like bargaining. Her belongings were removed from the castle. The chambermaid folded the dresses into trunks, removed the sheets, and took out the small pillows. She found the very box with letters tied with string in the dresser. There were no letters from ambassadors and ladies. There were neatly folded sheets of paper without dates or signatures. Each sheet was short: a count of stitches, the number of bowls of soup per day, notes about the carts that arrived at that distant house. The maid realized that these sheets came from there. She took the box to the king. The king looked at it and ordered it to be given to the bishop. The bishop accepted the box and said he would burn anything that could become the subject of rumors. He burned the blank sheets of paper without names in his stove. He left only one note from the Queen, the very strip of paper with the inscription on the lid of the box. He did not touch the box. He returned it to the king. The king placed it on the top shelf in the large room with portraits of former monarchs. He did not label it. He did not take anything out of it. He simply left it there. Agnieszka learned of the Queen's death from a passing merchant. No official letter was brought to her. No one in the house by the old church thought it necessary to inform her. The merchant brought salt and talked to the steward on the porch. He said that the capital was in mourning and that they said the Queen had died quietly after a long illness. That evening, Agnieszka opened her notebook and put a period larger than usual. Then she closed the notebook and did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, she asked the abbess to let her go to the service. The abbess let her go. The temple was empty. Agnieszka stood in the corner and thought about the Queen's small room, about the string that an extra page had once pulled out of her sleeve, about the thimble, about how the Queen had removed the sheets without saying a word. She thought about how no one from the capital would come for her now. No one would call her back. She returned to the house, took out the thimble, put it on the table, and counted the needles. She opened the notebook again and wrote, "Stitches 412. Then she put a period. In the capital, the heir took the queen's place at ceremonies.
The king still sat with an impassive face, listening and making decisions. In the city's churches, people sometimes remembered the night when the queen disappeared from the ball. Rumors gave rise to new versions of events. Some said that everything was different, that they were not together at all, that there, in the sacristy, they prayed for peace. Some said that everything was exaggerated. No one knew for sure, except for the bishop and those 2 guards. The guards remained silent because they knew the value of words. The box stood on the shelf for many years. Dust did not settle on it because this large room was always cleaned thoroughly. Nearby were books on laws and agreements with neighbors. Sometimes the heir would come in, stand at the table, and look at this thing. He knew about the inscription on the lid. He once asked the bishop to explain why the queen had left these 2 things.
The bishop said that sometimes people do not have time to tell the truth to those they should, and leave a small sign in the room that cannot be read in the square. The heir nodded. He closed the door and went to the council. Time passed. The house by the old church gradually emptied. Agnieszka grew older and quieter. She still counted stitches and put dots. A few years later, the old steward died and another took his place. He knew nothing about the past and asked no questions. One autumn, a woman from the capital arrived at the house. She did not give her name. She brought an inconspicuous package. She handed it to the abbess and said that it should be given to one of the women living there who had previously served at court. Inside was a thimble, exactly like the one that lay on Agnieszka's table, only with the word "home" engraved on the inside. Agnieszka took it in her hands, ran her finger over the engraving, and placed it next to hers. Then she opened her notebook again and put a period. None of them ever met again. Their lives diverged, like 2 corridors in a castle, one leading to the library and the other to the kitchen. The queen remained in the city's memory as a woman who spoke little and kept order. The lady-in-waiting remained in the memory of a few people as the one who mended shirts and neatly folded ribbons. The bishop lived for many more years and wrote in his papers that the best cure for loud sins is silence, because it preserves those who must live on. He did not mention names. He did not describe details. He left a short note in the archive, done without noise. When old things were being sorted through in the library decades later, the box was taken off the shelf again. The new king asked what it was. He was told that it was left by his grandmother. He opened the lid and saw the inscription. He did not know the whole story. The phrase was enough for him. He closed it and put it back in its place. Then he ordered that it not be touched unless necessary. He understood that there are things that hold walls stronger than supports. He did not look for names. He did not want to know who exactly had put the strand of hair there. He knew that it was someone's last truth. That was how the story that began one night in the sacristy ended. It did not become a trial. It did not become a war. It became a year of silence, a year of illness, exile without chains, a small box with 2 things, and a short inscription. Those who stood at the door with the lamp have grown old and died without telling anyone anything. The chronicles only record that the queen stopped appearing in public that year. Oral memory retains whispers about the lady-in-waiting who was exiled. The box remained in the library room.
The inscription on the lid still read, "My only confession." And that was enough for everyone who knew to understand, and for those who did not know to pass by.